President Yudhoyono, Dr. DeBoer, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. If there's anything I'd like you to leave this hall with today is the idea that beyond science, beyond policy, beyond planning, beyond strategy, there is so much more work to do, and all of us have a role to play. We live in the Anthropocene, a period in which humans play a major role in shaping the biosphere and its processes. Physical processes can no longer be examined in isolation because human processes have become the dominant driver. When we look at the human footprint, certain things come to mind. Through the years, we have not really been looking at the way we consume natural capital as bank statements. We have not been measuring whether the amount we consume can be absorbed by the planet and it has enough time and space to generate new resources. How much of the retained earnings that we have generated have reinvested back in the planet? In the future, reinvention, retooling, and renewal are going to be key result areas for business. When we look at the global ecological footprint of humanity, we now sit 50% beyond the planet's renewable limits. Asia-Pacific is 77% beyond the region's renewable limits. Many of us came here in a car. In a car, you have a tachometer with a red line, and the red line really says that there is a point beyond which that engine will explode. These are thresholds. And as we face a climate-defined future, the thresholds become hypercritical. A growth engine that creates wealth must do so continuously, reliably, inclusively. You cannot have a car that is going to break down on you in the middle of the expressway. Last year, the managing director of IMF made this statement that sets the platform for which I will focus my talk on. I'm going to drill down on some ideas and on some actual lessons that we have learned in the Philippines. Climate change is going to be nonlinear. It's also going to be highly variable. The game is changing. And if, as businesses, many of us in this room expect to thrive, then you have to play better than anyone else. I like to compare climate change to Pandora's box. She was given this box and she was told, don't open it, but she did. And all these demons came out of the box. The box is fossil fuels, and those demons are climate change. There are two things we have to do. We have to shut the box, but we also have to deal with the demons because they're there. Shutting the box is mitigation, but dealing with the demons is the management of risk, and that's adaptation. What are we seeing? Climate trends, temperature is creating changes in major global systems. Ice melt, enhancement of rain and the water cycle. NOAA says that in the 21st century, our part of the world will have the greatest increases in rainfall and storms. In the Philippines, we redefined what storm surge is and threw the Dvorak scale out of the window. We're also seeing the partner of ice melt, thermal expansion, which is really a major cause for sea level rise. We have learned that sea levels do not rise like the water in a glass. It is not surprising to know that seas have waves and swells and rise that same way. And once again, the area most likely to have sea level rise increases and anomalies are in our part of the world. We must talk about adaptation because the estimates are that even if all of us stop using our cars today and shift from coal to solar panels, it will take 10 centuries for things to settle back to normal. And in the meantime, climate change will be our bedfellow. Will they still be around 1,000 years from now? Will we still be around? In the Philippines, over the last 4 years, we looked at 16 major cities, trying to understand what is the impact, what are going to be the risks and opportunities emerging out of climate change. And there were a number of patterns which I will share with you. First of all, borrowing from yesterday's discussions, the impacts will affect both companies and competitors, as well as markets and consumers. So they are not limited to one sector. They will affect rich and poor, young and old, public and private. The management of risk, therefore, is really the management of change. It's how we take our countries and our businesses forward in a structured way to be able to change, not just tweak, the way we work. Another thing we noticed is that many of the reactions are reactions. Countries, cities, businesses are not being proactive enough. Much more investment really needs to be set in preparedness. Let me tell you a story about the island of Guam. 50 years ago, well, Guam shares typhoons and earthquakes with the Philippines. And 50 years ago, the people of Guam came to the Philippines, to Subic Bay, which maybe the president has been to, and they said, let's see what ideas we can use in Guam to be able to protect us against earthquakes and typhoons. And they borrowed quite a number of infrastructure plans, which they implemented in Guam. They haven't lost a single house in 50 years. So there are ways to be proactive. This shows you the rainfall trends in the 16 Philippine cities we looked at. What is the one thing you notice? They're very site-specific. And so the task at hand for business and for government, especially local governments, is to disaggregate the data and understand how it will affect different parts of the world in different ways. What will happen in Cebu is very different to what will happen to Sulawesi. It's very different, and therefore the preparation must be different. We cannot be lulled by averages. The opportunities are site-specific as well. Now, this is not a cut-and-paste process. Some areas in the Philippines, we noticed, will have a lot of rain. Some areas, like General Santos, will have a lot of heat. There are some areas that are on the coast, which may suffer from sea level rise and surge. There are some areas that are inland that may be affected more by river flooding or saltwater intrusion. Over the next 30 years, the president mentioned that population is going through the roof. And a lot of this is going to be here. More people already live in Asia Pacific than in the whole world. This is a fish aggregating device, something that we look at when we talk about fisheries management. They're drawn by the lure of food and shelter. Cities are like that. A taxi driver once told me he moved to the city because in the city there's a chance that he may win the jackpot. But in the provinces, maybe that might not be the case. Good weather and a lot of land creates what we have seen as migratory sinks. And there are specific parts in the Philippines that have clearly, even without major climate impacts, already acted as migratory sinks. You add on a climate event or an extreme weather event such as Haiyan, and this photograph was taken inside the belly of a Hercules, C-130, after Haiyan hit Tacloban. Forced migration is a reality. We have to make a decision whether we are going for planned, proactive development or become victims of forced migration. Cities and urbanization will characterize our future. The president mentioned that earlier. Cities are by their nature resource scarce. Manila, for example, gets its food from outside, Its water comes from the mountains in the Sierra Madre outside. Its energy comes from outside. Its labor force, its workforce comes from outside. Left on its own, Metro Manila is unsustainable. Its footprint is 3,400% beyond the renewable limit of the national capital region. We have to invest in spreading the risk and sharing the opportunity in the secondary tier cities. It cannot just be the capitals. Cities can drive a renaissance. And I ask you to take that word very seriously. Let's go beyond revolution. Let's look for that new day, for that new world. And cities can be the center of innovation and efficiency. This is their opportunity. Many cities remind me of hunter-gatherers. They are resource-constrained and very trade-dependent. What will happen when the new emerging middle class that we have helped create because of our social development programs gains that position where they say, I have earned my money, I have worked hard for it, and I will consume. It is my turn. What are we going to tell them? No, you cannot consume. It's a difficult situation. The role of trade is going to shift. Clearly, we're seeing this happening already. But cities have to look at how they can evolve from simply being consumers to centers for renewal. So we're not looking at simply gathering, we're looking at farming. We're looking at planting, at renewing. That being the case, cities have to look beyond their fences and look at ecosystems, watersheds, rivers, forests, the interaction between these systems, and plan accordingly. Cities must work with cities and towns within the ecosystem because they share a future, and therefore they must work together. We should never forget that the environment is really the only social security system of the poor. And when things become difficult, that's where they go. All cities are going to have to tackle a range of challenges as they build to preparing for a climate-defined future. And each city has to make its own choices, what it will do first, what it will prioritize, how it will phase these changes. But the goal should go beyond food security to greater self-sufficiency with new public and private formulas. There are a number of key result areas that we have found need to be done in our work in the Philippines, and I'm sure this applies to many countries of Asia Pacific. One, we must define land use. With population going through the roof, people are going to want land. And unless we do this, we may have a difficult situation. We cannot treat natural capital like a liquidation sale, as we have always done, like everything must go, that we are going out of business. There must be a reserve left, because there will be more people that will be born. Yes, we must guarantee food security, but bear in mind that one of the patterns we have seen is that as urbanization advances, agriculture retreats, and therefore the role of the urban-rural linkage becomes more and more important. We collectively have to figure out how to sustainably produce more with less. We have economic zones, we have protected areas, we have tourism zones. Why don't we have integrated food production zones? Isn't food important to us? We just had breakfast, we're having a coffee break after this. Obviously, food is important to us. Now, unless we delineate this, and food production may end up being diffused and unconcentrated. This was proposed in Manila, where we realized that this may be an opportunity for large agricultural establishments to work with smallholders, to share technology, agricultural extension, financing services, transportation technology, to be able to work together to produce food for each country. In the Coral Triangle, an area we share with Indonesia, Malaysia, the Solomons, Papua New Guinea, and Timor-Leste. It's clear that we have really pushed our fish stocks to the edge. There is a problem with aquaculture Let's solve them. Let's not look at it as if, no, we cannot do that because that's a problem. No, because we have to ensure local self-sufficiency. We cannot allow the cost of food, especially fish, to become so expensive that it reaches beyond the ability of the poor to handle. So food, water. There will be changes in the quantity, the quality, and the timing of water. In the Philippines, although it is called global warming, we are seeing a lot of rain. And the management of flooding is essentially the management of conveyance and the detention of water. But we have to get beyond that and understand that we have to absorb water because we also have to restore our aquifers. We also have to reuse water as they do in Singapore and figure out how we can make more with very little water that we have. There are other challenges we have to look at. We have to look at flood-neutral development. Cities like Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta, Metro Manila are all developed within flood zones. This is probably a vestige of our colonial past when the world was ruled by galleons and everybody traveled by ship. And so we've developed on the coastlines and we've realized, that's not the place to be. Like Singapore, we have to invest in multi-sourced water supply. Unfortunately, in many countries in Asia, groundwater, which should be only the lifeboat, is actually the main source. And not enough attention has been paid to the use of rainwater and surface water. We have to look at multi-sourced water supply. These islands in northern Bohol in the Philippines are the Danajon Bank, one of the world's 2 double barrier reefs. 3 islands in the Danajon Bank were evacuated 4 years ago. They were not flooded. They did not face the threat of going underwater like Tuvalu or the Maldives. It was something much less. Saltwater intrusion. That precedes flooding. Their wells became undrinkable. Their crops died, as did their trees. The island remains above water, but no one can live there. This is a key result area. We have to look at a balanced energy mix. Let's talk about the reality that the world is replete with fossil fuels, and my country is no exception. President Aquino is my president, and I support him, but we are a democracy, and I'm entitled to disagree. And in this case, I disagree. I think he made a very big mistake by allowing so many new coal plants to be built. Why? You might think I would talk about pollution or emissions. No, I'm talking about cost. The International Energy Agency talks about how the cost of oil and gas is going to go up, and up over the next 20 years, affecting, therefore, the cost of doing business and the cost of living. This is a very political situation. The reality of baseload is that because we are dependent on foreign supply and therefore prices, we often have dislocations in the supply chains. Local power can be very expensive and we get brownouts. In the private sector, if you buy a new piece of equipment and after 2 years or 1 year you realize that it's not working well, you replace it. Why have we kept the same energy systems in place for 50, 60, 70 years? In archipelagos like the Philippines and Indonesia, clearly a central grid may not be the way to go. There's an opportunity for us to seize control of our energy mix and reduce grid dependence, building indigenous energy sources. The goal is not simply cost today, but to look at cost stability over 20, 30, 40 years. We have to look at learning. I'm not simply talking about the students who are in the formal system. I'm talking about the people who will drop out, who have become our problems in terms of poverty. We have to look at human capital investments and build skills using virtual opportunities available today. Because we have to develop brains, not simply buildings. Access and transport. Approximately 80% of the world's transport is carried on ships. About 40,000 ships a day go to sea. The Stanford University did this study on how to prepare seaports for sea level rise. And it involved using a lot of cement. But when you look at what Singapore did, I think that is something we have to learn for. They have designed floating container terminals. So let sea levels rise, our terminals will simply float. Cement floats, by the way. We have to look at mass transit more carefully. Our nation and many countries of Asia are unfortunately copying the California model where everybody has to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cars. This is not the way things are supposed to go. With population booming in our part of the world, mass transit is something we should be looking at very carefully. And as cities, we have to look at how access and our road systems will survive extreme weather events, whether we sit in flood zones. There are solutions. This road was built by President Marcos 40 years ago over a flood zone in central Luzon, and it still works. And these are things that we have to be looking at more carefully. We cannot simply pass the cost of infrastructure to the private sector. This should not be their problem. They should not be exposed to marginalization every time an extreme weather event happens. The question is, are we competitive? And to be competitive, are we cost effective? I underscore the importance of cost. We were asked by the Philippine Cabinet to draw a policy paper on sustainable consumption and production in the green economy. And one of the things we found out that between the years 2000 and 2009, that a lot of GDP growth in the Philippines was coupled to resource extraction. This is the hallmark of a developing economy. When we looked at 6 OECD countries, we saw a gap between GDP growth and resource extraction, and we asked ourselves, what is that red arrow? That's shared value, value added. This is a key result area as well. To graduate from developing to emerging and from emerging to developed, we have to learn how to produce more with less. And every string along that fish supply chain, for example, beyond production, the man who sells the ice, the man who drives the truck, the woman who provides the financing, all of those are components of shared value, and all of those are ways by which people can create wealth. There is a role for the countries of the North here. As the countries of the South seek greater transactional control, making investments in sustainable production and more sustainable methods, the North is going to have to give up certain luxuries that you've enjoyed for too long. The FOB contract must be replaced with CIF, and the South must be allowed to retain more of the earnings from its transactions than it has been traditionally given. We face a complex and very dynamic future. Over the next 30, 40 years, as the President mentioned, we are going to see major increased demand for food, water, energy. This is going to lead to a heightened level of complexity. It is no longer going to be enough to have a single strategy. We must have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. And governments cannot do this alone. The private sector has a role to play, a major role to play. The solutions will have to be multifaceted, redundant, and very innovative. With population growing the way it's expected and a new emerging middle class, with increased production and consumption, and the fact that climate disruptions and dislocations will continue, we must invest in reserves. There must be something left for the next generation. We cannot treat natural capital the way we do a liquidation sale. Balanced growth that looks beyond financial, that looks at how to unleash the potential of human capital, that looks at how we work within the budget of nature in a balanced way. This is what we should invest in. Cities and countries, to be sustainable, must look at balance, shared value, building competitiveness by investing in renewal. There's a whole menu of solutions available, but ultimately the decisions must be made locally. We face change. It is important that we do not fear change. We should understand it. And by understanding it, adapt to it. And by adapting to it, learn how to thrive despite change. In the 16 cities that we visited in the Philippines, the dominant development driver that emerged was governance. Governance is not government. It is you and I. It is the public and private sectors. And in a country like the Philippines and Indonesia, which is democratic, democracy is not merely freedom. It is participation. It is citizenship. Ultimately, the reality we all have to face is whether we like each other or not, and this includes China, we have one planet and one future. Thank you very much.